Okay, guys, welcome back to another preview and prediction video. This time we're going to be starting out with the Big Ten. It's going to be the Big Ten East. But before, could you please hit that like button? It really helps out the channel. And if you like this content, please subscribe for more. Okay, we're going to start out with the Ohio State Buckeyes, who finished first in that division last year. They went 13-1 with an 8-1 record in the Big Ten. They were 8th in the country on offense with 42.4 points per game and 52nd on defense with 25.5 points per game. Returning production is 62nd of 130 teams. Five-year recruiting average is 6th. They were 14th in 2019, so a little bit down from there, but I think that's just because of a transition from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. And you kind of lose some recruits with that. Even though Ryan Day is a great recruiter, he's not Urban Meyer. They don't know his track record yet. Key losses, obviously, Dwayne Haskins. He had 4,381 yards, Ohio State record. 50 touchdowns, another Ohio State record, and only 6 interceptions. The guy's the real deal. I don't like Ohio State, but I respect him, and I respect his play. He's a great player. And I think the Washington Redskins got a steal with the 15th pick in him. They also lose wide receivers Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin. First and third in yards, and first and second first and third in receptions, and first and second in yards. Sorry about that. They also lose center Michael Jordan, who played guard for them and center, lost him to the NFL. They also lost Isaiah Prince, but from my friends that are Ohio State fans, that's not a big loss. They didn't like him very much. They do lose Nick Bosa, but again, he only played 3 games last year, but in those 3 games, he had 4 sacks and 6 tackles for loss. So a lot of production in just 3 games. I don't even think it was 3 games. I think it was about 2.5 games before he sustained that ankle injury. They also lose Draymond Jones, defensive tackle. Plugged up the middle, was a great pass rusher. Actually, was second on the team in sacks and tackles for loss. So he wasn't just plugging up holes for rushing plays. He was a very good pass rusher from the interior as well. They also lose speedy cornerback Kendall Sheffield, who had his ups and downs, but overall is a good player. Was drafted in the 4th round by the Falcons. But key returning, they returned J.K. Dobbins, who had a bit of a sophomore slump last year, 1,053 yards on 4.6 yards per carry. I believe the year before he averaged something like 7 yards per carry, so a pretty big drop-off. And the offensive line was probably even at least the same, maybe a little bit better than his freshman year. So I'm kind of confused as to why his production went down. Mike Weber actually stepped up pretty well in his absence, or lack of production, not his absence. He was there, and he's no longer there as well. But they also bring back wide receiver KJ Hill, who is second in yards and 4th in touchdowns. They bring back probably the best edge rusher in college football, at least transitioning from college football to the pros, in Chase Young. He led them with 14.5 tackles for loss and 9.5 sacks. He's an absolute monster. I don't know if anyone's seen the picture of him this year. He's gigantic. He looks a lot like Jadeveon Clowney body-wise. And I think he could be as good, if not better, than him. Because Jadeveon Clowney's a great player in the NFL, but I don't think he lived up to what we thought he was going to be. They also bring back Jeffrey Okudah, and this hurts because he's from Texas, and he was the best cornerback in 2 years ago in that class coming out, and I really thought we were going to get him, but Ohio State unfortunately got him. He's a really good player right now. He's in the top 20 NFL prospects. He'll probably be a first-round pick unless he gets injured or has a terrible year. He was also in second in passes defended last year, so it's a key getting him back and performing at a high level. I have Ohio State, by their standards, having a down year at 10-2, and I'll tell you why. Urban Meyer won 90% of his Big Ten games. Nick Saban's all-time record, just his record at every school he's ever been to, not conference-wise, just all-time record, is a 785% win percentage, which is great. So if Ryan Day won 80% of his games, which is more than Nick Saban does on average every year, then guess what? That would still be less than Urban Meyer's 90%, and that would guarantee you another Big Ten loss every year. So that would guarantee you probably 2 Big Ten losses instead of 1 Big Ten loss. So I just don't see him doing that. I don't think he's going to be better than the best coach historically in Big Ten history. I think he's going to be good, but I think they're going to lose 2 games this year, and I think you'll probably get years where you'll lose 2, and then you'll win, and then you might not, or then you'll lose 1. I could see that, or this could be a year where 2 games does get you in the Big Ten championship. We'll see, but I have them winning at winning versus FAU, winning versus Cincinnati, win at Indiana, a win versus Miami of Ohio, and then I have a loss from Nebraska. This is the fact that I think Nebraska is going to be much better, but this is your first real road test. Indiana's not a real road test. Don't get me started on that. But first real road test with a quarterback that's never really played before, and Justin Fields. Now, this is 5 games in, which helps. If you switch the Indiana-Nebraska game, I think Nebraska would probably kill them. But I think it will be a close game, but I do think Nebraska wins. They play Michigan State. That's a win. Then I have a bye week. And then after that bye, they play Northwestern at Northwestern. And Chandler actually thinks this will be a loss. I don't. I think they'll win this game because they have a bye week before. So that's a win. And they play Wisconsin at home, another win. Bye week, win versus Maryland, win at Rutgers, win at Penn State. And then guess what? The biggest rivalry in college football, Michigan versus Ohio State. And I don't really know if you can call it a rivalry since Michigan hasn't won in over a decade? It's been a long time. Michigan, I'm gonna pick them to win. I thought they were gonna win. I didn't think at the beginning of the year they would beat Ohio State last year, but when Michigan started rolling and Ohio State, kind of looked iffy on defense, and Dwayne Haskins kind of looked unenthused in some games, I was like, okay, I think Michigan can beat them, and then they absolutely got killed 62-39. So obviously that didn't happen. I'm going to take Michigan to win this game. So I have Ohio State finishing 10-2. As I mentioned, Michigan, the team that's up next, came in second last year. 10-3, 8-1 in the Big Ten. Offensive rank was 21st with 35.2 points per game. On defense, they were 16th with 19.4 points per game. I wonder what that average would be if they didn't get destroyed by Ohio State. My assumption would probably be around 17 points per game. I wouldn't be surprised if that added 2 points per game to their average. 5-year recruiting is 16th and 8th in 2019. Key losses on defense, they lost a lot. They lost Devin Bush, second in tackles for loss and third in sacks. They lost Chase Winovich, who led them in tackles for loss and sacks. They lose Rashawn Gary, and he never really lived up to who he was supposed to be at Michigan. People forget this guy's rated by 24/7 Sports, or 247 Sports. I forget if it has a backslash or not. But he was rated as a top 10 prospect in high school football history. He never lived up to that. He was a good player, but he wasn't of that billing. Tyree Kinnell also, who was their leading tackler, safety. He didn't go to the NFL. I don't believe he was picked up by anyone, but he's a good player, a leader for them. He's a 2-year starter at safety, so that's going to be a big loss. They also lose cornerback David Long, who's the best cornerback, and he was a third-round pick by the Rams. They also lose running back Karan Higdon and Chris Evans, their backup running back, who's a good player and maybe even better than Karan Higdon, was suspended. So they don't have their 2 leading rushers. They don't know who their running back is going to be right now. But whoever they do have is going to be behind one of the best offensive lines in the country, the best in the Big Ten. And I think whoever fills in will do a decent job because it's when you're going up against, especially Michigan's schedule isn't very tough other than a couple games, you'll be able to find someone to fill in for Higdon and Evans decently. Key returning also, Shea Patterson. He underperformed last year but still had 2,500 yards and 22 touchdowns. And then you're stacked at wide receiver. All 3 of these guys are going to the NFL. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, Tariq Black. And they also have one of the best lines, as I mentioned. And then you have defensive end Josh Uche, who was second in tackles for loss last year with 8, and he was actually first in sacks. Chase Winovich, was second in sacks, who left. And then you have Khalid Hudson, who's a lot like, if you don't know who this is, he's a lot like Deion Buchanan. He used to play for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was a hybrid. He would play safety, he'd play linebacker, he'd come in the box, blitz a lot, he'd go back into coverage, play man-to-man. He was a do-it-all type of player. I think he can be that for Michigan. Or a better example, Tyrann Mathieu, someone like that. I don't think he's that good as Tyrann Mathieu, but I think he can be that type of player, very versatile and skill set wise. I have Michigan 11-1. Like I said, you already know I am beating Ohio State. Their loss is a shocker to most people, or is going to be, to Maryland. I have them losing to Maryland. I have to pick a loss. Like I said, I'm very rarely going to pick a team to go 12-0. It's just not going to happen. Every team, other than Clemson or Alabama, every other year usually loses a game they're not supposed to. So I have win versus Middle Tennessee State, Army, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Iowa, Illinois, Penn State. Like I said, lost to Maryland, Michigan State's a win, Indiana's a win, and then win versus Ohio State, 11-1. Penn State, I think they're gonna have a bit of a down year. I think they're gonna be a little bit worse than what they were last year. And last year they were 9-4. They were 6-3 in the Big Ten. Their offensive rank was 32nd in the country with 33.8 points per game. Their defensive rank was 23rd in the country with 20.5 points per game allowed. Returning production was 100, and that's pretty low returning production wise. And their 5-year recruiting average, though they've recruited very well while James Franklin's been there, is 13th in the country and 12th in 2019. Like I said, though, they lose a lot offensively. They lose quarterback Trace McSorley. Talent-wise, don't get this wrong. Talent-wise, he does not remind me of Baker Mayfield. Demeanor, leadership, and just on-the-field charisma and bravado, he reminds me of he reminds me of Baker Mayfield. He only had 18 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year, but he almost single-handedly, if you watch the Ohio State game, willed them to that game. Very good leader, big heart. They're going to miss him. Running back Miles Sanders had over 1,000 yards rushing on 5.8 yards per carry and 9 touchdowns. They'll miss him as well. It's nice to go from Saquon Barkley to Miles Sanders. The Eagles are going to love having him. Sharif Miller led the team in sacks with 7.5, and he's gone as well. And then cornerback Amani Awari led team in interceptions and passes defended. He's no longer there as well, another NFL player. All of these guys are in the NFL. Trace McSorley was undrafted, but he is in the NFL with the Ravens. Key returning, KJ Hamler. This guy kind of reminds me of KJ Hill with Ohio State. Fast, shifty, but he's small. He's a little bit smaller than KJ Hill, not as muscular, but he's elusive. He's a speedster, and they need to get the ball in his hands more often. He led the team with 42 receptions. I would like to see that around at least 60 this year, with 754 yards. And defensive end, Utur Gross Matos finished with 8 sacks and 20 tackles for loss. They also bring back Robert Windsor, who was a disruptive defensive tackle, totaling 7.5 sacks. So that's pretty impressive from the defensive tackle spot. But they are going to have to find a replacement for Miles Sanders. Ricky Slade, who was there last year, it looks like the replacement. He only had 45 rushing attempts last year. They also brought in Noah Kane, who was one of the top 12 running backs in the recruiting class last year. And they also have Journey Brown and C.J. Holmes battling too. So there's a lot to go there. My guess is Ricky Slade will get most of the carries, but we'll have to see. I have Penn State taking a drop off this year because you don't know who the quarterback is going to be. Tommy Stevens was supposed to be the quarterback. He transferred to Mississippi State. Right now it's a competition. We don't know who it's going to be. We'll find out tomorrow, Saturday. I have them winning versus Idaho, win versus Buffalo, win versus Pitt, bye week. So you start out 3-0, and that's pretty good. Then you lose to Maryland, win versus Purdue, loss at Iowa, loss at Michigan, loss at Michigan State, win versus Minnesota, win versus Indy. Then they're at Penn State, or at Ohio State, sorry about that, and that's a loss. Then I have a win, obviously, versus Rutgers, which puts you at 7-5. Next up, we have Michigan State, who I think is going to have a bounce back year in the Big Ten this year. Doesn't have back to D'Antonio, however you said it. I'm caught up with Mike D'Antonio. But Mark D'Antonio doesn't have back-to-back bad years. So they were 126 in offense last year with 18.7 points per game. 8th in defense. Their defense was spectacular with 17.2 points per game. Returning production is 48th in the country. Their 5-year recruiting average is 28th. They were 32nd in 2019, though. Key losses, they don't have many. L.J. Scott, who wasn't productive last year because of injuries, but he was their main running back the last 2 years, and he would have been last year, so past 3 years pretty much. And they also lose cornerback Justin Lane, and he had 15 passes defended last year. He was a third-round pick for the Steelers, so that's a big loss. But Mark D'Antonio usually does a pretty good job of replacing pieces like that. Key returning, Brian Lewerke. I know he had 8 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, but he had problems with his shoulder last year. Hopefully, if that gets healthy, we'll see what he looks like fully healthy and then judge him from that. Running back Connor Hayward, who stepped up in L.J. Scott's place, produced pretty well last year. They also return all 3 of their main wide receivers, Cody White, Darrell Stewart Jr., and Jalen Naylor. Each who missed games last year was with injuries. This whole team was injured last year. If you looked at them, I'm pretty sure almost all of the 22 guys that started out on the field as starters last year missed time at some point. They get back Joe Bashy, leading tackler, 102 tackles, and then Kenny Willekes, the heart of the defense, a former walk-on. He's an absolute monster. Would have went pro last year, but broke his leg in the Red Box Bowl, so had to stay for another year. Last 2 years, he's had 33 and a half tackles for loss and 13 and a half sacks. Josiah Scott's supposed to be the next great cornerback. He's following up Darqueze Dennard, Trey Waynes, and maybe even Justin Lane in the NFL. We'll see about that. But Mark D'Antonio does a pretty good job of replacing guys like that. I have him going 8-4. Wins versus Tulsa, Michigan, Arizona State, a loss at Northwestern, win at Indy, loss at Ohio State, loss at Wisconsin. That's really hard, back-to-back road games. A bye, and then wins versus Illinois, loss versus Michigan, and then wins to end the year with Rutgers and Maryland. So 8-4 on the year for Michigan State, a little bit better. But I think they could go 9-3. That's a very good possibility that happens, but I have them going 8-4. And then Maryland, 5-7 and 3-6 in the Big Ten. Offense, they were 69th in the country with 28.5 points per game. Defense, they were 78th in the country with 28.7 points per game. Returning production is 70th. 5-year recruiting average, they recruit a lot better than most people would think. 36 in the country the last 5 years, 47 last year, so a down year because I think the coaching changed and just the bad image that school has right now because a player did die under the leadership of the university last year, so that's a big deal. Key losses, they lose the 3 best defenders from each unit on their defense. They lose safety Darnell Savage, a first-round pick. He had 4 interceptions, which was second on team, and 5.5 tackles for loss. They also lose undrafted free agent, but he's still a good player. Trey Watson, leading tackler, 108 tackles last year, and he was number 1 in picks with 5. So he's all over the field, flying around. I know he stood out to me in the Texas game when we played him. Sadly, we lost to him again. Make jokes down below. Defensive end, Byron Cowart, they lost him too. And this is a bad defensive line anyways. He was their leading sack artist with 3 sacks. Your leading sack guy should never have less than 5. That's really bad. Their defensive line was probably the second worst in the Big Ten, so that has to get better. Key returning running back Anthony McFarland Jr. is an amazing running back. Set a school freshman record with 1,034 yards and averaged 7.9 yards per carry. I know he's still running all over Ohio State right now. Ohio State fans probably see that man in their nightmares. They also get Virginia Tech transfer Josh Jackson, who actually put up a Virginia Tech freshman record, 2,991 yards and 20 passing touchdowns in 2017. He was actually injured in the 3rd game last year for Virginia Tech, and he decided to transfer. They also get Mike Loxley, who has a 3-31 record as a head coach, but I actually think he knows that area very well, and he was their offensive coordinator at one point. I think he'll do a good job recruiting there and getting the type of players he wants. He'll have some talented targets. Unfortunately, one of these guys is hurt, Deshaun Jones, who threw a touchdown, ran a touchdown, and caught a touchdown versus Texas last year. I don't know how that guy was a 3-star recruit. He's fast. He's agile. He's super athletic. But unfortunately, he tore his ACL, so they'll miss him a lot. But they do get Dante Demas and DJ Turner back. They also get Buffalo transfer Tyler Mabry, who should step in at tight end. And Mike Loxley loves his tight ends. He runs a lot of 2 tight end sets. So that'll be important for Mabry to step up and be a good tight end there. They also hired offensive coordinator Scotty Montgomery, who was the East Carolina head coach. Hopefully he can be better offensive coordinator than he was a head coach because East Carolina the past years was been very, very bad. I have Maryland going 7-5. I have them making a bowl game this year. Wins versus Howard, wins versus Syracuse. I know that's surprising, but I'm not that high on Syracuse like everyone else in the country is. Win at Temple, a bye week, then a win versus Penn State. At Rutgers, a win. So they start out 6-0. Or at 5-0, sorry. And then you only have 2 more wins from here on out. A loss at Purdue, a win versus Indy, a loss at Minnesota, a win versus Michigan. I know, surprising. Loss at Ohio State, a bye week, and then 2 losses to end your season versus Nebraska and on the road at Michigan State. So 7-5. Indiana, offensive rank last year was 88th in the country with 26.4 points per game. Defense was 81st in the country with 29.9 points per game. Balanced, but not balanced in a good way. Returning production is 12th, so they bring pretty much everyone back. Their 5-year recruiting average is 51st in the country and 36th in 2019. Key losses, Wes Martin, really good guard, showed he didn't even get invited to the combine. They went to Indiana's pro day. He stood out. He was so good. he got drafted in the 4th round by the Washington Redskins, but they also lose their top 2 tacklers and safety Jonathan Crawford and linebacker Damian Willis Jr., who is a linebacker for them. They have to be better at pressuring the quarterback. Only 22 sacks, so you have to get more athletic on the edges and up the middle and try to get pressure on the quarterback because you lose a guy in the 2nd level and then in the 3rd level at safety with Jonathan Crawford and 2nd level with Damian Willis. You have to be better in your front 4. Key returning defensive end, like I talked about, they need to get better. Here he is, James Heed. He looks primed to emerge as an outside pass rusher. He's very athletic. And they also have Jerome Johnson and a junior college transfer, Juwan Harris, assigned to the defensive tackle spot for run stopping. Michael Penix Jr. is actually probably going to take over at quarterback for them this year over Peyton Ramsey, who had a pretty decent year last year. He had 19 touchdowns, but the problem with him is he had 13 interceptions, so high risk, high reward with him. That's what I noticed when I watched the Ohio State game when they opened up with them last year. It's a lot of, wow, that was a heck of a throw downfield, and then, wow, what the heck are you doing type throws. And that drives the coaching staff crazy. They'd rather have consistency, so they're probably going to go with Michael Penix Jr., who has a stronger arm, and he's also a better runner. The O-line also has Coy Cronk and guards Simon Stepanek back returning. And sophomore running back returning Stevie Scott. Last year as a freshman, he averaged over 5 yards per carry and 1,000 yards. So he was a really good running back as a freshman. Not as good as Anthony McFarland, but very good in his own right. And he'll be back. I have Indiana going 5-7 this year. Wins versus Ball State, wins versus Eastern Illinois, which isn't a slouch. They can play, but I think they'll beat them. A loss versus Ohio State, a win versus UConn, a loss at Michigan State, a bye week, a win versus Rutgers, a loss at Maryland, a loss versus Northwestern, a bye week, and then a loss at Penn State and a loss to Michigan. So 4 straight losses end of your season. You were 5-3. You're going to be 5-7 in my opinion after that. So that does it for Indiana, and then we go to the last team and the worst team, probably in the Power 5 in Rutgers. We won't spend a lot of time with them. And I finally found one. I found the worst offensive team. I was looking for that and the worst defensive team. I haven't found the worst defensive team, so they're not in the Power 5 most likely. The worst offensive team is Rutgers. They average 13.5 points per game, ranks 130th in the country. Defensive rank, 89th with 31.4 points per game. That's pretty sad when you're giving up 31.4 points per game, but that's what's keeping you in games because your offense not keeping you in games. 5-year recruiting average, 56th, and that's 64th last year. Key losses, none. But guess what? You don't have any key losses because none of the guys you lost mattered because your team's not good. Key returning, though, they've returned 3 offensive linemen. They returned 3 of their top 5 pass catchers, and this is nothing to sneeze at. They do have a good running back, too, in Raheem Blackshear and Isaiah Pacheco. They are the bright spots on the team. They both ran for over 500 yards and average at least 4 yards per carry. And you're like, only 4 yards per carry? All these guys are averaging 5 to 8, 5 to 9, 6 to 9. These guys are running behind a garbage offensive line with a garbage quarterback. And talking about the garbage quarterback, the 2 quarterbacks that played last year combined for 5 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. Coaches would pretty much dare them. Here, 8 guys in the box. See what you can do. And they throw interceptions. That's what they do. Arthur Satowski and Giovanni Resigno are not the answers at quarterback. And guess what? They may have found one, though, because they got lucky. I don't know why he transferred there, but he did. McLean Carter from Texas Tech. He's a pretty good quarterback, a lefty. He's going to be way better than the guys they had last year. And he may even compete for, the middling part of quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I don't think he'll ever be Justin Fields, especially with the talent around him, Justin Fields or Shea Patterson, but he can be around the Brian Lewerke mark, what I think Brian Lewerke will be when he's healthy, around the middle mark. I don't think he'll be 5 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, but could he throw 15 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, which would be pretty good for what they had last year? I think he could. I have him going 2-10. I'm going to lose to everyone except Liberty and UMass to start out the seasons. They have UMass with the first game, then Liberty is their 9th game. So that's what I have. That'll do it for the Big Ten East. Stay tuned for the Big Ten West. Please hit that subscribe button. Please hit the like button. And I'll see you guys later.